Welcome to Aging with Dignity, the podcast where we explore the systems, people, and personal stories that shape how we care for ourselves, our families, and our communities. I'm your host, Versha. With each episode, we dive into the real life challenges and choices facing older adults and their families, especially right here in Quebec. Today's episode is a little different. I'm flying solo, no guests, just me sharing something I think is really important. This short monologue gives us a chance to pause and lay the groundwork. I'll walk you through something I've recently learned about Quebec's care system, a key distinction that affects how support is accessed and understood. My hope is that by the end, you'll not only understand the difference between a caregiver and a care provider, but also feel more equipped to find the right resources, whether you're helping a parent, a partner, or a friend. And don't worry, future episodes will include guests from all sides of this discussion. But today I want to speak plainly without leaning in one direction or another, just to share what I've discovered and why it matters. So let's begin. Today we're diving into something many people don't realize is unique to Quebec, and the legal and cultural distinction between a caregiver and a care provider. Let's start with what might seem like an obvious question. Who is a caregiver? Well, in Quebec, the following distinction is very intentional. This nuance is emphasized in Quebec's language laws and policy documents, distinguishing the emotional, non-professional caregiving from formal medical care. A caregiver is usually a family member, friend, or neighbor who provides unpaid support to someone facing challenges due to age, illness, or disability. The key is the relationship. They're known to the person receiving the care, and they give of themselves, motivated by duty, love, or simple presence. A care provider, on the other hand, is someone who delivers care as a profession. Support workers, nurses, doctors, therapists, specialists, respite workers, and so on. They are paid, credentialed to deliver health and support services, and serve within a system. I find this distinction so powerful because it reflects what I've experienced myself. Let me share a maybe surprising, somewhat example. When my mom began to lose her motor skills, my dad quietly stepped up. He took over the chores, the cooking, cleaning, laundry, etc. Dad never asked for help. It wasn't part of his regular routine, but those chores got picked up along the way. And he was in his 80s, so don't ever say you can't learn new things after a certain age. Then came COVID. Living nearby, I was able to help out somewhat, but the bulk of the initial care for mom really solidly fell to dad. There were no external services at first, partly because we didn't know what was available, partly because everything shut down, and we didn't even know what to ask for. One day, probably somewhere in 2021, 22, when I popped in to see mom and dad, I found dad in the kitchen making rotis. Now, for those of you not familiar with the art of making these whole wheat Indian roasted flatbreads, this is a feat normally undertaken by the lady of the house. Sifting the whole wheat flours, making and kneading the dough, rolling the flatbread, roasting them on the tava or griddle, gently coaxing them to puff up, and then applying a nice dollop of ghee or clarified butter on each. Yum. But this is somewhat labor intensive, though all the Indian homemakers who did this every day would laugh it off. But this is why we get these ready-to-made rotis so easily today. But instead, there was my dad at the stove making fresh hot rotis for their dinner, which in our family had always been my mom's domain. He'd never been taught how. He just learned passively, I guess, by watching my mom over the years. That image, dad rolling out dough on the counter, stays with me as a symbol of caregiving in its purest form, giving of yourself without being asked. Later, with the help of my mom's doctor, we finally connected with the CLSC. It took months to get a file opened, meet a caseworker, and eventually received in-home support. That's when this distinction between caregiver and care provider started to become evident. So in our example, my dad was a primary caregiver. Over time, I became an external caregiver. When my brother or sister spent time with them, not ad hoc but significant time, they were caregivers. Friends who regularly brought food were caregivers. The CLSC workers who came to help, those were our care providers, along with the nurses and doctors. In our case, as I assume with many families, a person requiring support may receive care and support from both caregivers and care providers. This distinction helped me face a difficult truth during my father's final weeks. I was struggling. Actually, I probably didn't even realize it until after the fact, but I was torn between providing care and simply being a daughter. A nurse gently reminded me, "You deserve the time to be with your parents just as their daughter." That wisdom stayed with me. In order to be a good daughter, I had to trust the care providers so I could step back into my rightful role as daughter, not clinician. My parents each deserved this, and I deserved it, to enjoy the final time on this earth together as parent and child. To embrace the love and history between us, not getting immersed in clinical care duties, when to feed, when to assist with hygiene routines, when to tend to the end of life medical challenges. And that's what today's episode is about, understanding this important and very Quebec-specific distinction between caregiving and care providing. It impacts how care is delivered, funded, and supported. In most places, these terms are used interchangeably, but here in Quebec, the distinction is not just linguistic, it's structural. This is, in fact, a legal, cultural, and linguistic distinction. Legally, recognizing someone as a proche aidant or caregiver grants them the ability to claim rights, set boundaries, and assert their needs within the health and social services network. Culturally, it validates their emotional labor, whether feeding loved ones, doing household chores, or providing moral support. And linguistically, caregiver underscores the agency of these caregivers. To unpack all of this, I spent considerable time digging into a few organizations that expressly provide support for informal caregiving across the province. And I plan to have several of them on this podcast in coming weeks to share how they expressly support the caregivers in Quebec. As I started researching more about caregivers, it's become evident that most caregivers often fall into this role by chance or circumstance. And once they start, things grow and develop over time. In Quebec, nearly 1 in 4 people are informal caregivers to a loved one. And for the majority of them, who are also employed in some fashion, the commitment to providing care, support to a loved one, is most likely impacting their professional and personal life. Often, caregiver responsibilities, coined as the invisible work, remain hidden. Emotional labor, staying calm while dealing with the issues around a loved one, organizing appointments, navigating medical, legal, and financial systems, or providing comfort. Because this work isn't paid or quantified, caregivers can easily feel unseen, even though they provide the backbone care that family and society depend on. In Quebec, the official recognition of caregiver status strengthens a caregiver's rights, their mental health, and workforce participation. Let's unbundle this a little bit. By strengthening caregiver rights, caregivers have access to support, training, respite breaks, and the ability to negotiate terms. Mental health is crucial. Feeling seen and credited reduces the feelings of isolation and burnout. And workforce participation. This ensures that we recognize that caregiving responsibilities are supported by workplace accommodation, like flexible schedules, reduced hours, or even leaves when required, all to avoid career setbacks. In my case, I only learned about the distinction between caregiver and a care provider just before starting to develop this podcast. When it came to my father, we were lucky. We had a great caseworker through the CLSC, and we were able to get access to respite care blocks. But even then, I never thought to ask about things like training or emotional support. I didn't know those resources existed. And I can't help but wonder how different things might have been if I'd been operating from a more informed place, if I'd known I wasn't alone. Mental health was a big one for me, especially those final 18 months. I was burning out. I felt invisible, isolated. I didn't need thanks or applause, just a moment of real recognition from someone close to me. And I got it just in time. It came from my dad, actually. In one quiet moment, he told me how so very grateful he was for everything I'd done for him and for Mom. I didn't need his gratitude, but hearing that he saw me, that he understood what caregiving was costing me, that meant everything. It gave me enough strength to keep going. The second wave of recognition came later when my sister took over a short time while we were away. She got to see it all firsthand. And she said it. Oh my God, I see what you've been saying now. That simple acknowledgement hit deep. And then finally, it was my brother who said it out loud when I'd quietly carried for so long that most of the care for our parents had just landed on my shoulders. I didn't need help. I didn't need to ask for help. I just needed someone to see it, to see me. And through all of that, I was also working full time. I'm incredibly fortunate to have a workplace that supported me, flexible hours, compassionate leave when I needed it, and colleagues who truly understood. That made a huge difference. Not everyone has that, and I don't take it for granted. Support doesn't just come from health services, it comes from community, family, and sometimes from where we least expect it. With Quebec recognizing and making the distinction for caregivers, we as a community are able to start to identify who these folks are and make sure they're able to receive the support and care they need to continue to care for our loved ones. After all, Quebec's care system depends on these informal caregivers, its invisible backbone. So, once we recognize the caregiver and their role in providing care for the elderly we love, let's now look at the sacrifices that caregiver is consciously or subconsciously making. What is that caregiver's home environment like? Do they have a family of their own? Is their partner understanding? Do their family members understand and support them? Have they had to relocate full time or temporarily to support the loved one? Who's picking up the stuff the caregiver typically did in their own home and is not getting addressed by them? How's a caregiver's own health? If a spouse to a loved partner, the caregiver is the last to consider the impact of his or own health. We as a community need to be alert, vigilant, and take steps to ensure the caregiver is cared for. And what if the caregiver is still working full time or part time? Do the caregiver's colleagues, boss, clients all understand and actively support them? Of course, the unsaid question here is for how long? For caregivers who are employed, finding a way to reconcile care services and work is essential. Work is a positive focus for caregivers. It helps you maintain financial, social, and emotional independence. It helps stave off social isolation. The social outlet at work can also help to offset the stress and anxiety. And honestly, once the caregiving is done, the caregiver will need to find their own life again in a healthy manner. As I dug into this area of support for the caregivers, I discovered this is where the caregiver and care provider distinction really has an impact in Quebec. It may be the case in other provinces too, but I'm not sure as I've not yet researched those. But here in Quebec, caregivers, please listen. If you need it, short term absences are supported and provided for under the Quebec Labor Standards Act. If you wish it, you could receive up to 55% of your earnings by filling the appropriate certificates. And what's key, you don't even need to live with or even be related to the person you're providing care for or support. They must just consider you a member of the family. Finally, there are also community based organizations that provide non financial support, psychosocial counseling, respite care, and peer networks. I provided links to these resources in the podcast notes and in the care toolkit for this week's episode. I've shared some personal stories and perspectives to help shed light on an important topic many of us take for granted: the difference between being a caregiver and a care provider. I feel this distinction is super important, especially for those of us aging in Quebec. Understanding the distinction in these terms means we're better positioned to seek out and obtain the support we need along the way as caregivers. There's no need to be invisible. Heck, how can we be with the numbers so prevalent and growing? In 2018, in Quebec, a little over 21% of the population were caregivers. That number today, halfway through 2025, is significantly over 2 million. As we've heard in Quebec, this distinction isn't just semantic. It's a reflection of how society values both the informal and formal caregiver roles and how policies, services, and financial support plans are designed with that in mind. Recognizing both caregiver and care provider roles distinctly will help us all age with clarity of roles and compassion. If you're caring for someone, let this episode be your guide. And I know you're far from being alone. I hope this episode has helped you to understand a little bit more about the process of getting started on the caregiver journey. If you're listening and you think you might be a caregiver, or if someone close to you is, know that you're not alone and support is out there. If you found a few useful tidbits from today's chat, I invite you to stay connected and share this episode with your loved ones. And don't forget to check out the Aging with Dignity Care Toolkit for this episode. I've included resource links from a variety of sources and suggested some action items to help you get started with your family conversation around caregiving. Everything you've heard today, just real talk. It's just our personal stories, experiences, and honest opinions. This podcast isn't providing legal, medical, financial, or therapeutic advice. And no, listening doesn't make me or my guests your lawyer, doctor, financial advisor, or therapist. The guests and I are here to share stories, spark ideas, and hopefully give you something to think about. When it comes to the big decisions, make sure you do your homework or check in with the experts who know your situation best. We're here to keep the conversation going. You're the one in the driver's seat. In the next episode, I'll be joined by Karine Saba of Caregivers, an organization that has sourced a variety of care providers that would be available for all of your needs. Thank you for listening in and sharing your time with me. Please join me each week for new insights into aging with dignity. Until next time, reminding us all to age gracefully and live vibrantly.